Dr. Jini Roby, Assistant Professor of Social Work, specializes in women's and children's issues, particularly related to adoption and abuse. Dr. Roby has presented and published widely on these subjects. Before joining BYU in 1998, Dr. Roby was an attorney guardian ad litem and represented the best interests of abused and neglected children as court-appointed counsel. Prior to this, she was in private practice focusing on family, child welfare, and juvenile law. She received her bachelor's in social work, master's in marriage and family therapy as a master's of social work, and also her JD Juris Doctorate here at BYU. On a personal note, I also know Jini is an incredible professor here and teacher, as well as being an advocate for children. She's had a wealth of experience in the international arena. I've enjoyed affiliating with her with regards to her work in the Marshall Islands, but I know she's heavily involved in Africa, dealing with AIDS orphans, etc. She teaches a wonderful class here that students love. It's global issues of children at risk, and anybody who's sat in her class can verify the warm person she is, and it's just my pleasure and delight to be able to introduce her today. I will turn the time over to her.
Gee, thank you very much for those the wonderful prayer and the wonderful introduction. Now I feel like I have to deliver something worthy of them, and I'll try. Okay, I am just kind of wanting to connect with the audience a little bit here. What are the majors that you're coming from? Some international relations, I'm assuming, right? How many of you are in international relations? About development. Oh, I guess that's not exactly a major yet, but okay. Minoring in development? Yeah, good. What about social sciences, like social work, psychology, sociology? Okay. Okay. What are some other folks? Law? Any students from the law school here? Okay. All right. Well, that helps just a little bit. I am actually, just like I think probably all professors worth their salt, I'm learning here at BYU, and I am learning a lot more than I can teach. And it's a very exciting process for me to be here. I've only been here 5 years, and I had a life before then, I think. Anyway, so I am excited to learn more about the global trafficking issue. And recently I have become very interested in trafficking into the United States and how the United States is responding to this trafficking. But in order to give you just a little bit of a background, I think we'll, oh, that's, okay. This one, I just click on this. Okay, well, here we go then. So what is human trafficking? There are many definitions depending on which convention you look at or which law, but here's a definition that I will offer you. This is by the U.S. State Department. A modern-day form of slavery involving victims who are typically forced, defrauded, or coerced. Those are terms of art. Force, fraud, oops, it just wants to keep going. Okay, force, fraud, and coercion are terms of art under most laws and conventions. In other words, you've got to have those terms and those conditions for it to be categorized as trafficking. But I think later on you will find that this definition is somewhat limited in its scope, and it's a disservice to some victims who fall outside of this definition. What it is not, okay, I think that's just as important for us to understand. What it is not is it is not illegal immigration. It is not just voluntary illegal immigration by people who want to come to the United States for whatever they think that they will face, okay? Because often in just plain illegal immigration, there's no force or fraud or coercion involved. And there is no exploitation, sexual or labor exploitation involved, okay? It is not smuggling. Smuggling I can do if I have come in from a developing world, a developing country, and I think that the U.S. does provide good opportunities, and I want to smuggle my nieces and nephews or my sisters and brothers, and I engage in illegal activity to bring them in. There's not going to be human trafficking involved. It is also not terrorist activity. I think you may have heard last night and this morning, maybe, on the news that some 40 truck drivers had been arrested because of driving with false licenses. And what they're suspecting is that there's probably human trafficking involved, that people are smuggling people in for labor exploitation. So we shall see how that turns out. I'm not excited. You can never be excited about these kinds of human problems, but intrigued rather to follow that. But some people say, wow, maybe these truck drivers are doing terrorist activities. Maybe they are wanting to blow up places. And, well, probably I think it's going to turn out to be more like a case of human trafficking. Okay, here is a definition that I like better. It is a longer definition, and I think longer was necessary to make it more inclusive. And I've tried to sort of divide it up into different parts by bullets, so it's easier for us to understand. It involves a recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt. So it covers the entire process from the origin to the activities that occur in the destination. By means, these are the means, threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, deception, the abuse of power, or of a position of vulnerability, or of the giving or receiving of payment of benefits. Okay, so that's very inclusive. To achieve the consent of a person having control over another person, and this is very important, for the purpose of exploitation. Now, what is exploitation? That seems like a keyword, doesn't it? Okay, well, I would think exploitation means that there is a financial gain, that somebody is going to make some money on this deal. Okay, so, and this is currently the more universal definition of human trafficking, just so you have some context under which you can evaluate the U.S. policy. This comes directly from the Trafficking Protocol to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. Organized crime, you say? Yep, organized crime. Human trafficking is a $7 billion a year, USD, a year business. And it is one of the 3 largest sources of profit from international organized crime. Behind drugs, or rather weapons, and drugs is human trafficking for international organized criminal activity. Yeah, and while it is only the 3rd largest of the organized crimes, it is the fastest growing of the 3. So it's a very serious development internationally. Well, here is a map that actually it's somewhat outdated, and I try to update it, but anyway, it gives you a pretty good idea just looking at sexual trafficking alone. Sexual trafficking, of course, means taking human beings from one place to another for someone else to profit from their activity, and it commercializes human sexuality and dehumanizes a human body. But anyway, these are just some of the statistics that are available. Most of them I have gotten from what's called ECPAT. That's the End Child Prostitution and Trafficking. This is the leading world organization. It's, in fact, a network of NGOs that are devoted to ending child trafficking, especially sex trafficking. There are a lot of missing pieces, of course. These are just representative of what's going on. It is estimated that probably 1.2 million women and children enter the sex trade per year, okay? And that includes within the country trafficking. And so even though you'll see some other figures in just a little while in terms of international trafficking, the sex trade alone brings in 1.2 million women and children globally a year. Okay, I think just to sort of get a good, maybe, I always say that information, if you can't link them to real people, is pretty abstract and it's pretty hard to really realize it's about real people. So what we're going to attempt to do right now is to see about a 6-minute clip from a movie that's called The Day My God Died. This is a movie that was made about girls who were trafficked from Nepal to Bombay or Mumbai, India. The reason I'm showing you this film or clip is because I couldn't get a hold of one about trafficking into the U.S. There are no such films right now. This whole idea of human trafficking, exposing our own information about our own need to do something about this, has been fairly recent. And so I talked to people really on the front lines of filmmaking and things, and they're saying, no, you don't have one to show. So this is the best we can do right now. And I'm sorry it's a little bit blurry, but this is what we have. Am I playing?
The small Himalayan kingdom of Nepal, wedged between India and China, is best known for its Buddhist and Hindu temples and stunning mountain vistas. But behind this seeming Shangri-La lies a shocking reality known as the flesh trade. Between 5,000 to 6,000 of the country's girls, some as young as 7 years old, are trafficked to India each year and sold as sex slaves. The majority become infected with HIV. Trafficking is the recruitment or transportation of a human being for work by using threats of violence, deception, or debt bondage. Trafficking for the sex industry is becoming a growing worldwide phenomenon. The United Nations states that it is the world's fastest growing black market, with up to 2 million children being sold each year. What you are about to see is an expose on the trafficking of predominantly young girls from their home villages in rural Nepal to the brothels of Mumbai, the Indian city formerly known as Bombay. These girls, prized in India for their fair skin, are often sold to traffickers by a close relative or family friend. Many are lured away from their villages under false pretenses of a phony job opportunity or marriage proposal. Some have even been abducted, and others go voluntarily in search of a better life. India and Nepal have no formal border controls between each other, so conditions are ripe for trafficking. In this video, you will meet 3 girls who were sold into slavery, but were lucky enough to have escaped and survived to tell their stories.
हाम्रो गाउँभन्दा अलि परको दिदी भन्थे मैले साइनाले कि त्यति उसले पनि चिने जानु थियो मलाई घरबाट लिएर जाँदा मेलामा लिएर जाँदासम्म ऊ त्यो मात्र थियो कि एक्लै थियो अनि बिचमा पुगेपछि अनि उसले कि बहिनी बिस्कुट खानुहुन्छ भने कि अनि भोक लाग्यो होला बिस्कुट खानुहुन्छ भने त्यहाँ मैले पहिला त खान्न भने अनि पछि चाहिँ खाऊ भने कर लाग्यो अनि मैले खाएँ अनि खाइसकेपछि अनि उसले खान दिएको बिस्कुट खान दिएको मैले अनि गाडीमा चढाएर त्यही हाम्रो घरबाट त्यही लिएर आएको गरेँ मलाई थाहै पाएन कि त्यहाँ त्यो गाडीमा चढाएर अनि बम्बई पुऱ्याएँ होइन बम्बई पुऱ्याइसकेपछि
Their destination is Kamatipura, Mumbai, otherwise known as the Cages, the world's largest demarcated red light district. Inside this labyrinth of lanes and alleyways, virtually any sexual service can be found for the right price. From beggar to the world's richest sheiks, there is an increasing demand for younger girls and virgins, fueled by a popular belief that having sexual intercourse with children will prevent sexually transmitted diseases and even cure AIDS. According to conservative estimates, there are literally thousands of sex workers in Mumbai, and the HIV infection rate is 80%, the highest in the world.
पुऱ्याइसकेपछि अनि म एकदम बिउजेँ कि बिउजेपछि मलाई थाहा भयो तल यस्तो बेचेर गयो भन्ने कुरा मैले थाहा पाएँ कि थाहा पाइसकेपछि अनि म एकदम रुने गर्ने गरेँ कि अनि त्यहाँ जाने यस्तो उसले घरवालीले कि यस्तो बेचेर तल यस्तो काम गर्नुपर्छ भनेर मलाई भन्यो अनि चाहिँ म गर्दैन भनेर चाहिँ मलाई एकदम पिटेर चार हात खुट्टा बाँधेर पहिला हात समातेर यस्तो बलात्कार गर्नु मलाई लगायो कि जबरजस्ती त्यो घरमा 25 जना जति थियो 10 जना जति मेरो उमेरको थियो 3 जना मभन्दा सानो पनि थियो 13 वर्षको थियो
हामीहरूलाई अब मान्छे राख्न मानेन भने तिमीहरूलाई काट्दिन्छु मार्दिन्छु भन्थ्यो त्यस्तो डर देखाएर हामीलाई मान्छे राख्न लगाउँथ्यो अनि तिमीहरूले मार्दैनौ भने हामी थोरै राख्नु मान्छे राख्नु हामीले राख्दैनौ हामी घर जान्छु भन्दाखेरि हामीलाई जान दिएन तिमीहरूलाई मारेर जमिन दफन गरिदिन्छु भनेर हामीलाई जबरजस्ती धन्दा गर्न लगाएपछि अब गर्न कर्तव्य लाग्छ गर्यो
Upon arrival to these brothels, the girls are broken in and their nightmare begins. Gang rapes, burnings with cigarettes and acid, and beatings are the final initiation for new girls who resist having sex with the clients. Girls are forced to sleep with as many as 20 men each day so that the brothel keeper can recoup what they paid the trafficker for them. The brothel keepers add interest and inflate the cost of the girl's living expenses so that the debt she owes is eternal. Living conditions are inhumane. The new girls are often locked in cramped cubicles behind iron bars and fed only one meal a day.
महिनामा कटाउँथ्यो आफूले जो कमाएको त्यही उनीहरूले राख्छ हामीसँग 4 पैसा राख्न दिदैन तिनीहरूसँग जान नमाने भने हिर्काएर पठाउँछ हामीलाई तिमीहरू धन्दा नगरी तिमीहरूको बाउलेरी गाएर तिउँछ भन्छ हामीले
Reports from girls who have returned to Nepal indicate that some members of the Indian police force are on the payroll of the brothel keepers.
Okay. Unfortunately, that was a short film clip, and I think it may give you some ideas of some of the inhumanity and suffering that goes on. But surely it must be different for the United States, you're thinking. Well, it is true that we don't have the huge, large-scale sex trade out in the open like they do in many of the countries, but Let me get to that in just a little bit. Let me give you more of a global background. What are some of the contributing factors? I've divided them up into the supply side, the demand side, and some of the global issues of movement of people. On the supply side, meaning what makes people come into the trafficking? Well, number one is their gender, actually. That if you are a woman or a girl child especially, you are very susceptible to being selected as a victim. On top of that, choose poverty. Poverty is at the foundation of so many of the world's issues, as you know. Lack of access to education. A lot of the girls, for example, in many of the countries that I've visited, the girls especially are not able to go to school. If a family has to choose between a boy and a girl, they will almost always choose the boy to go to school. And so girls are typically burdened with the responsibility of helping to support the family, but they're not able to go to school. They don't have those opportunities. And so it's easier for them to end up in the trafficking area, domestic servitude or the sex trade or other labor exploitations. There's the chronic employment, lack of economic opportunities. There's discrimination, and there are cultural mores about females. Those are very important factors, actually. So if any of you are studying anthropology and cultural psychology and those different things, we know that the culture contributes a great deal to what is acceptable in terms of women and children. On the demand side, in other words, what kind of people are on the other side accepting the services, if you will, or the work or the torturing of the victims? Well, number one, not necessarily number one, but these are some of the main factors. I think greed is actually behind most of it in terms of why people are motivated to traffic. But there has to also be a demand. If you will look at it sort of in an economic analysis, you have to have the supply side and the demand side, and you've got to have somebody to link the two sides together. And so you look at the demand for commercial sex and the demand for labor exploitation, because many times people are always looking for cheaper labor, people to exploit, whether it's in a sweatshop or as a domestic servant or whether on a farm or orchard. Okay, we've already said greed. And I think this one, the commodification of human beings, seeing people as not necessarily humans with souls and dignity and self and worth, but as things that can be bought and sold and used to benefit someone else. Okay, global factors. Someone had said, trafficking is the downside of globalization. And you saw in the video just now that because the borders have become so permeable, and borders have become not only physically more permeable, but also because of the internet and because of the transcontinental travel, transnational travel, and all of these different ways of exchanging people or exchanging information, doing business, and all of that, linking the supply and demand side, the middleman's job has gotten easier and easier all the time. We have pockets of foreign capital flowing into certain parts of the world. I know, for example, in Rio, in Brazil, there is a very hot pocket right now for sex tourism. People are putting a lot of foreign capital into that area. There are jobs being created. Foreign nationals are visiting there a lot. There's a great demand for the sex trade, and a lot of victims are trafficked into that area. Governments often ignore harm to their citizens because of a lot of different reasons. Some of it's cultural, some of it's for market motivations so that you continue to get the foreign capital involved. There can be a lot of different reasons, but it does seem to be happening. And in worst case scenarios, they are not only ignoring, but kind of cooperating in some cases. For example, in Thailand, we know that sex tourism is the #1 source of raising money. So, you know, it's really and they are trying hard on one side to try to curb that, and on the other side, it's a very strong business. There are few, I say few, but really very few international laws. We have conventions. Conventions are really not enforceable until they can be turned into laws at the national level. And so we have these international conventions that sometimes look very good. Countries can ratify those, and they sit on their shelves, unenforceable until they can turn them into national laws. So that's an issue. We don't have a judicial venue for transnational crimes, unless it comes into something, you know, huge like crimes against humanity, you know, things like that. But that's another big topic right now, whether we should have an international court of justice. And so far for trafficking, we don't have that. So, okay, let's look at incidents annually. These are the most current figures that people are using. 800 to 900,000 people are trafficked internationally. That is not counting the numbers within countries, okay? And so you just heard them say that probably close to 2 million women and children are trafficked into the sex trade a year. That's not the total numbers, you know, by the way. Women and children. Children constitute about 1/3 of the trafficked people. And into the U.S. alone, there are 50,000 people. And this is not, you know, figures produced by some advocacy group. This is the government study, okay? So United States, in its findings, in the congressional findings, part of the Victims Protection Act, it comes right out and admits it. And, you know, that's just what that's the best guesstimate. Major sources of countries into the U.S., we don't really know. We know that Mexico is definitely a very strong supplier. Russia, we think, is another one, but because of the underground nature of these things, we don't really have a good handle on the numbers and the source countries. Okay, let's give you a U.S. case. 4 girls trafficked. This is a real case, and you can find this on antislavery.org. 4 girls were trafficked into the U.S. from Mexico. They are promised marriage and work at the point of recruitment. They are then, after arriving in the United States, sold to brothel owners in New Jersey. They're forced to have sex, beaten if they refused or talked to each other, and then all money is taken away, and the dollars are sent to the trafficker who has moved on to another state. Okay. Now, the fact that people can be spread out and are cooperating together in a trafficking venture calls for some special interstate cooperation that I'm hoping that we can have some time to talk about. Here's another U.S. case. 6 Mexican migrants are lured from Arizona to New York State. They're transported. After arrival, they're told that they each owe $1,000 for the transportation, food, and rent. And so their wages have to be taken by the people who are keeping them in a little orchard shack kind of thing. And this is what they're being charged rent for. And they cannot leave. They're watched all the time. And threats of violence and lockup without food for a month if they should try to leave or contact authorities. Okay. You'll be happy to know that both of these cases have been convicted under a new federal law. Of course, these are the cases that we know about. There are a lot of cases that are not convicted that we don't know about. Where are the victims working, exploited in the United States? Typically, you'll find them in the farms and orchards, sweatshops, a lot of sweatshop workers, domestic servitude, brothels, dance halls, nightclubs. We have many, many international conventions that are related to this issue of slavery, and most recently we've come up with the term trafficking. Trafficking is probably a fairly new term to most people. I think if you see sort of that we've had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights since 1948. We've addressed issues of slavery since about 1956. The abolition of labor convention. But anyway, the Stockholm Declaration had to do with trafficking of children. The Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime is probably the leading international convention right now. And under that convention, they've come up with the Trafficking Protocol. So if you hear something about the Trafficking Protocol, we're talking about this one. This is a protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, okay, especially women and children, all right? So, okay, the United States has not a proud history about slavery, as you know. I don't want to go into all of that, but just to show you that we did have the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865, and in 1869 we had some laws regarding peonage and slavery passed, and those words are still on the books. And we, in fact, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that passed in 2000, about October, so about 3 years ago, in fact, just amended some provisions of the peonage and slavery legislation. So they sound somewhat archaic, but they're still the terms we use. And that is how trafficking in humans is still conceptualized. Okay, what does this Victims Protection Act do? Okay, it applies in all of the United States territories and possessions, and that's important because it covers some of the outlying areas like Guam and some of the other places where human traffickers tend to get a foothold and take their victims first. And that's where a lot of the sweatshops are. That's where a lot of the exploitation occurs. Okay, targets labor and sexual exploitation. And later I'm going to share with you that that's kind of a problem, that it only addresses labor and sexual exploitation. It applies to those involved in recruitment, harboring. Now, this kind of mirrors the protocol, the Trafficking Protocol definition that I shared with you earlier. So it does involve all of those people that are involved in the chain, okay? And these are the major things that the Act establishes. Protection and services for victims in the United States, but that's kind of a narrow group of victims, actually, as you'll see. Criminal penalties for trafficking using psychological coercion. Under the Peonage and Slavery Act, actually there had to have been physical force or legal coercion. But here's what's legal coercion? By the way, that's where you tell victims, you know, we got you in with false documentation, but we're going to tell on you, and you're going to have to go to jail. Okay, so a lot of victims feel like they don't have a choice. They have to cooperate. Okay, programs in countries of origin, transit, and destination. So we try to do something about the big picture, as we have done with drug trafficking. We've had a lot of success because we haven't just addressed the demand side here at home. We have addressed issues in the sending countries. And so this is kind of what we're trying to do, the same model. Okay, the problem is that, well, it's a good thing. It's a good start. And but you know, we have to also acknowledge limitations if we're honest with each other and if we want to go ahead and improve what we're doing. So it's only for victims of severe form of trafficking, okay? And they have to agree to help in convicting the case. So, and these are not bad things, okay? But keep in mind that sometimes you can't prove your case, or maybe the perpetrator has left the state or it cannot be found, in which case you cannot establish that it's a severe case, okay? So this is a problem. Severe form means you're under 18, or that you are a victim who was subjected to both force, fraud, or coercion. Remember, those are the terms. And you were exploited either sexually or in terms of labor, okay? So that's what defines whether you are a victim of severe form, okay? And on top of that, you have to agree that you're going to help in the investigation, apprehension, and prosecution of your trafficker or traffickers. Now, at the time that your case becomes known to the authorities, whether you take it to them or they find you, you have to decide right there whether you will cooperate and whether you are you can't decide whether you're a severe form victim, but you have to agree right on the spot. Now, other countries, some other countries like Belgium and Netherlands, will give them some time to make up their minds, because it's not an easy issue for victims. They can be re-victimized by the traffickers. Their families in their countries of origin can be harassed and even killed if the traffickers have a network in the original country. Do you see that it's really not an easy issue for victims? And so they need counseling. They need to be informed about the consequences of cooperating or not. And the United States doesn't really give them enough time. They can be deported. They can be put into a deportation facility right away. So that's one of the things that I think is not very compassionate. Okay, but what kinds of assistance can severe victims get? Well, actually, they still have to be certified, okay? And that certification is done by Health and Human Services, okay? How do you get certified? You have to be willing to assist in investigation, etc., okay? And you have to have applied for a T or U visa. Either of these visas will give you continuing status, okay? In other words, you can stay in the country. And you have, and you can work. So you have the work authorization, okay? And they have to show that the person's presence is necessary in order to move the case forward. So this certification is viable only as long as the case is viable, okay? In other words, is it beginning to sort of feel like victims are only good as long as they can help as a law enforcement tool? Yeah, that's basically where we are. That's how we're starting out in the United States right now, all right? And like I say, we've got to do something about this. We've got to establish it as a crime. We've got to bust the crime, and we've got to deal with that. But at the same time, we have to look at victims' issues and protecting victims programs for the victims, and the two aren't quite meeting up right now. Let's say that a victim jumps through all these hoops, and is certified, okay? What can they get? Well, they can get the same public benefits as refugees. What does that entail? Lots of things. I've just listed a few that came to me top of my head. This TANF benefit, which is a public cash benefit, very little, but nutrition program, food debit card, medical services, sometimes housing services. Okay. They can also be eligible for victim protection program for themselves and for their family. That includes privacy of location, but I've read a lot of cases where that's not happening. Let me just read you one case here. A trafficker recruited Nina, a 19-year-old from southeastern Europe, to work as a waitress, but then raped, beat, and drugged her, forcing her into prostitution. After a daring escape, her trafficker hunted her down and kidnapped her, taken into custody during a police raid. taken into custody during a police raid, Nina agreed to be a witness against her trafficker. The police officer assigned to protect her gave away her location, and her trafficker threatened her life. At the trial, she was forced to sit next to her traffickers and was insulted and humiliated by the judge and defendant counsel. Her pimps were found guilty but released on appeal. For her own survival, Nina has fled to another country and assumed a new identity. And that's a real case too. Okay, so as you can see, the privacy issue, victim protection, is really not very tight. It needs to be improved quite a bit. But they are supposed to have that, and the privacy of records, and they're supposed to have victim rights as they go through the prosecution process. Okay, other programs under the Traffic Victims Protection Act include these things that deal with other countries. Prevention in source countries, and helping victims in other countries, and USAID is a major player in that. And this is the last one, this tier system. I find it really quite interesting. They have all the countries of the world pretty much divided up into 3 tiers. And tier 1 are the okay countries that are kind of going along with what U.S. thinks they should be doing. And tier 2 are still needing improvement. They intend to do well, but they're not quite getting there. But tier 3 are the countries that are really flunking, okay? And they can lose non-humanitarian, non-trade funding, like they might lose U.S. support of their IMF applications and things like that. Anyway, so I wanted to just kind of tell you that it's kind of, you know, the U.S. is trying to work with other countries. And so how is the U.S. doing? Okay, as I've already whined about, it only applies to labor and sexual exploitations and excludes something that I'm very concerned about. The organ market is an issue. And in the convention, the International Organized Crime Convention, they address human organ market issues, people who are trafficked for that. So that's, I think, a very serious, because I can't document this, but I have read many places where it says that the U.S. is a major consumer of illicit human organs that have been bought and sold on the market. But this next one, international adoption, this is me, because there's a lot of exploitation and trafficking going on in terms of international adoptions that this does not address. Male brides issues, that's really unclear whether they can fit somewhere. Okay, the other thing, helping victims is a tool of law enforcement, and it is not necessarily there to really help the victims. And we need to get there. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't help law enforcement. We need to address the crime. Certification is very difficult. In the 2 cases that were convicted, the waiting was over 9 months and 15 months. Some of these cases are taking longer. So what do they do in the meantime? How do they survive, and how do they protect themselves before they become certified? The victim witness program, we talked about that a little bit. Victims are subject to limitations of public benefits, and sometimes they're not at a place because they're coming in to a strange country, with strange language, strange customs, unknown systems, hard to compete in this economy. So it's really a difficult situation. And victims live in fear that their case will be dropped. And then what? They don't have the protections that they should have. They have been, while they're waiting, they've been housed in jails and other restrictive settings that restrict their liberties. And, I mean, just dehumanizing. Federal agents and agencies are typically in large places, large cities, and if they should relocate to smaller rural areas, it's really difficult to work with them. Court procedures are scary, as you heard about in Nina's case, and because of the right of confrontation on the part of defendants, and our courts want the facts at any cost, and that can give away a lot of should be protected information, and there can be reprisal to family back home. So I just want to end with posing some questions, which is typically what I think is the apex of education, is just asking more questions. Why do so many people get trafficked into the U.S.? And what should, in fact, be the rights of trafficking victims as opposed to refugees, legal immigrants, illegal immigrants, the different types of people that come into the U.S.? Would increased victim rights encourage voluntary victimization? You know, we all have these kinds of thoughts. We all wonder, if the victims will get it really good, will that sort of, you know, why should the U.S. rank other countries? Why, you know, why is that part of our national program? Okay. How should the U.S. deal with citizens of other countries who organize trafficking in those countries? Should we be able to reach them? What if U.S. citizens go to different countries and organize the trafficking there and stay there? What should we do with our own citizens that participate in this trafficking? So there are lots and lots of issues and lots of questions that we can ask. So anyway, that's really all I had prepared for you today, and I can stay a few minutes if you can to answer any questions.
We'd like to thank Dr. Roby, and I think what I would like to suggest is if you need to leave, if you could leave quietly, because some of us would really like to have maybe 4 or 5 minutes to ask a few questions. So we'll ask you to leave quietly, and if anyone also would like copies of her presentation, we have some copies up here for you. Let's turn the time over for a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Sure. Dr. Hawkins.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. Thank you very much. I'm curious about, what about going after the end users instead of the traffickers? Is there any attempt to do that? Go after the you know, the
Sure.
people who use these prostitutes and stuff like this?
Oh, yeah. That they're in the chain of the people to be targeted. Yeah, under the Act. For sure. Yeah.
And how much is that done? Is it typical that law enforcement will go after the trafficker or go after
the
go after an employer?
end user?
Them going after an employer
Yeah.
very much, the end user.
I think they actually do. Yeah, I heard somewhere that 347 cases had been convicted, and that the employers were about 1/3 of them. Yeah, so no, I think they do. Yeah.
Quick follow-up on that.
Mm-hmm.
Are the traffickers normally citizens of this country in the U.S., or are they citizens of other countries?
Well, I think that it takes international cooperation. I think that just like any other international organized crime, you're going to have players, on both sides. And like I say, some U.S. people will go to different countries and help to organize it, and then they will just hide out because they don't want to be convicted under U.S. laws. And so in that way, I think we should have extradition treaties, under this, so that U.S. people can be extradited out of the country where they're doing these things back home so that they can be convicted, or we need to have some kind of a mutual treaty so that we can get to those people. At the same time, we should be able to have some say over people who are organizing that are citizens of the originating countries too. So we're really sort of in infancy in terms of even using the word trafficking, let alone really being able to think through this whole thing. Yeah. And like we are using some of the things we learned from the drug trade, but dynamics are somewhat different, so. Back there?
I was just wondering if there's some kind of legal loophole for debt bondage, because I just wonder why they even create this illusion of, what they're going to pay them eventually. They're working to pay off some debt when they really have no intentions of ever paying them. What is debt bondage?
Okay, well, debt bondage can be real. The families say a family can sell one of their daughters to a trafficker and actually give them some money.
So
right. And so then the girl has to go to wherever she's...
considered trafficking?
Yeah, trafficking is the moving of that human being for purposes of exploitation of that person. Yeah. So the debt bondage, by the way, is like where an example would be that a parent gets some money for selling one of their girls into the sex trade. She gets to Mumbai. She is not given any money because she's paying off her parents' debt, right? Okay. Plus, she may be charged for her own transportation, plus rent and food and clothing and medication and all of that. Yeah. So, does that answer your question? Am I missing something?
On the lines of people who are tricked into thinking that they're going to have work that's going to pay them. And when they get there, they're told that, oh, well, you owe us for this or that.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I see. And so, why do they even say that?
Yeah. Is there some kind of legal loophole for that? Why would they bother doing that?
Well, okay, so the scenario would be like those farm people, right, that got transported in the van, and they were in New Jersey, and when they get there, they say, you owe us $1,000 a piece, right? Okay, so, well, when you say legal loophole, I'm assuming, is there a law that addresses that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the Trafficking Act, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that we just talked about. It's meant to address cases just like that. Yeah.
It just seems like a line that could easily be blurred. You know, like they owed us money.
Well, you've got to have coercion. You've got to have coercion, fraud, or force. Okay? On top of the exploitation. Right? Okay. So somebody's going to make money by transporting people from one country to, even from one state to another, say. But in this case, it's one country to another. Okay? As long as everything is on the up and up, you know, I tell you, you come with me into the U.S., you pay me $1,000, okay, once you get there and you start earning money. And I stick to that, okay? Well, I'm just smuggling you, all right? I'm not trafficking, really, all right? Okay. Yeah.
I've got a question about an act of Congress in 2000, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Who were the sponsors of the bill? What kind of debate did it experience? And then who are the major political figures that seem to be most aware or most involved with the domestic response to trafficking right now in the United States?
The U.S. state that is responsible to carry out some of the laws and so on, and especially with the other countries. Okay, U.S. Justice Department is dealing with the prosecution and so on, you know, through their FBI and the federal court system. Okay, the Health and Human Services is responsible for the social programs, such as the public benefits and so on. Okay, Homeland Security is the one that issues the T or U visas. So it's really an interdisciplinary, interdepartmental effort. It takes a lot of people. In fact, there's a task force that encompasses just about everybody, every department, every federal department.
Is that an executive task force?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was created by an executive order, and it involves all these different departments and USAID and Homeland Security and all these different people. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. How about in terms of in Congress? Who were the bill sponsors and what type of debate did it receive? And who are the Congress people who are most...
Yeah, I really can't, I don't know who the senator was, but I'll tell you the debates that occurred. And probably you can look up the senator, but the debate is this. Where do we, in fact, draw the line between smuggling and trafficking, okay? And will giving victims these protections and, you know, services, in fact, encourage traffickers? And all they have to do is bring them here and hide, right? And will the victims end up thinking that that might still be better than what they've got back home? You know, those are kind of the worries that we have. And those were kind of the debates that we had. Yeah. But, as you know, the United States is in a position, you know, because the global community is sort of defining this as a slavery issue, right? And every time somebody says slavery, man, we are we are smarting. We are really needing to do something to show that, no, we don't participate in slavery, right? So that was the other side of it, that we had to respond to this kind of global pressure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Watching that video, it seems kind of interesting to me that Hollywood was obviously able to find these slavery brothels, but do domestic governments such as India or Nepal have laws that prevent situations like this? And if not, has there been international pressure on them to get those?
Sure. Yes to both. It's a big business in a lot of these countries, but they do have a lot of laws. Are they enforced? Not really very well. Many times the police, sort of get a cut for looking the other way sometimes. In fact, they will sometimes raid brothels and take all the girls away from the brothels and sell them back. Or they, and in that process, kind of weed out the sick ones and so on, that are not useful. And so that kind of thing does go on. Sometimes the police is a part owner sometimes. I mean, I'm sure these are not the common practices, but it does happen. Border Patrol are, famous for taking bribes and letting things go. There's quite a burgeoning industry on creating false documentation. And so, yeah, I mean, the governments know about it. Is it a real priority? Not really. In many countries, it's been shown that it is not a real priority. They have other big things to worry about, like bringing foreign capital, which includes a lot of sex tourism. Okay, they're worried about their infrastructure, building the economy. So for a lot of countries, poor women and children who are not really deserving of national attention, and they might be bringing some money into the country, if you can see it that way. It's not a huge priority. Yeah, and I think everybody knows that these brothels are there. It just stretches on forever, and a lot of famous red light districts. So, yeah.
Sexually transmitted diseases, and especially HIV/AIDS, are a big problem. But what about pregnancy? How is that dealt with?
It's a really sad situation. Sometimes the girls will be allowed to have the children, and the children may then belong to the brothel because, and in fact, we have another film that just rips you apart, and in it a girl gets pregnant, and the madame says, well, you can have the baby, and we're not going to give you an abortion because we're into this for a long time, and we're going to need younger and younger kids. And so you will have your child, and she will also live here and work here. Anyway, the girl gets so distraught over it, that the mother girl, that she swallows a lot of pills, and she ends up killing the baby and wanting to kill herself, but doesn't succeed that far. And so she shares her feelings about how it was better for her child to die. But anyway, a lot of pregnant girls will either be able to receive an abortion. They will try to abort the babies themselves, because once they can't, perform, then what do they do? So that's an issue. So anyway, it's just really an ugly, thing going on. Well, that depends on how deep we want to go. I think one of the things that we really need to do is to increase the value that we put on the lives of women and children. Okay, immediately or in the long run, or yeah. Yeah. Okay, from here. Okay, of course, yeah. I think one of the things we can do is to refuse to purchase the things that are made by these sweatshops and companies that use sweatshop labor, okay, questionable sweatshop labor. Now, this is a little complex because some people, they want to work. They need the work. And some work is better than no work. And so to say we need to wipe out all sweatshop work, that's not a good thing. We have to be realistic, okay? Because like Nike, okay, they closed the factory in a village because there was a lot of international pressure to bear on child labor. So they closed the factory, and what happened? The kids were out on the streets, you know, selling their bodies or doing other work that's more dangerous, you know. And so they've reached sort of a good compromise, actually, in that Pakistani village, to be able to let the kids do some of the work at home and let some of the parents help with their work, too. So it's employing adults and protecting children from sweatshop conditions and so on, and allowing them to work around their schedule so they can go to school instead of being out of school, which is a major issue. So that's something we can do, but so I think that that's one of the most important things we can do as consumers of some of the products here in the United States. I think we ought to lobby our Congress people to support programs in foreign countries that provide micro-lending credit, that provide for more education for girls. That's a very fundamental issue. Education for girls has proven to be the most effective tool in overcoming this kind of situation. So I think that's very important. And, you know, we use very little of our money for foreign aid, you know, 1%. Something like that, you know, and I think we can do a lot better than that. And it's a matter of letting your members of Congress know what is important to you and what we should be doing, how we should be directing the USAID money. So, see you, Darren. Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions, then thank you very much for having been here.